That's my husband, with your wife. You're so funny. So what do we do about it? Oh my God.
I found out my marriage was a lie under a 200-year-old chandelier, surrounded by 300 people sipping champagne they didn't pay for. That's the part nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't happen in private. It happens in public, in your best tuxedo, while a string quartet plays something classical and elegant, like the universe is mocking you with good taste. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 34 years old, and until 8:47 p.m. on a Saturday night in October, I believed I had a good life, a beautiful wife, a stable career, a future that made sense on paper. Then I saw Chloe. She stood near the grand piano in the center of the Atlanta History Museum's atrium, wearing a silver silk gown that caught the light every time she moved. She was laughing, not her polite laugh, not the one she used at my company dinners, but the real one. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in months. She was laughing at a man named Julian Reyes. I knew who he was before anyone told me. Everyone in that room knew who he was. Julian was the reason half the guests were even at this gala. A Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter, the kind of man whose face showed up on billboards downtown. Tall, effortlessly charming, the sort of person who made you feel underdressed even in a rented tux. He leaned in close to Chloe, too close. His hand rested on the small of her back, like he'd done it 100 times before. And Chloe, my wife of 6 years, didn't move away. I felt the room tilt. I want to tell you I confronted them right there, that I stormed across the marble floor and demanded answers. But the truth is, I just stood frozen, holding a glass of champagne I couldn't taste anymore, watching my entire life quietly collapse in front of 200 strangers. That's when I felt a hand grip my arm. You see it too. It wasn't a question. I turned and found a woman standing beside me, dark hair pulled back, wearing an elegant emerald dress, her fingers trembling slightly against my sleeve. I didn't recognize her at first. Then it clicked. Julian's wife. I'd seen her photo once, in a magazine spread about power couples in the industry. Her name was Clara. In the photo, she'd been smiling beside Julian, like the perfect supporting character in someone else's story. In person, standing next to me, she looked like she was barely holding herself together, and somehow still more composed than I felt. "I've known for 3 months," she said quietly, not looking away from Julian and Chloe. Tonight, he stopped even trying to hide it. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a stranger who just handed you the exact shape of your own pain? "How long have you known about her?" Clara asked. I didn't. Not until right now. Something in her expression shifted. Not pity exactly, but recognition. Like she understood, in that instant, that we were standing in the same wreckage, just from different angles. Across the room, Chloe finally glanced our way. For half a second, her laughter died. Her eyes met mine, and I watched something like guilt flicker across her face, quickly replaced by practiced composure, the same mask she probably wore at every one of these events. She raised her glass slightly toward me, like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't just watched Julian's hand slide across her back in front of God and Atlanta's entire art scene. Julian, for his part, didn't even bother looking uncomfortable. He caught Clara's eye across the room and gave her a small, dismissive nod, as if to say, "Behave." As if this, whatever this was something he expected her to simply tolerate. That nod did something to me. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was fury. "They think we're going to make a scene," Clara said, straightening her shoulders. "They think we're going to fall apart right here, so they can feel sorry for us and go back to laughing. I looked down at her. Her hand was still trembling on my arm, but her jaw was set, her spine straight, her eyes fierce, despite the tears threatening at the edges. "I'm not giving him that," she said. "I'm not giving either of them that." Something about her resolve steadied me. I straightened my own shoulders, matched her posture, and for the first time since I'd walked into that atrium, I felt like I could breathe. "Neither am I," I said. We didn't storm across the room. We didn't cause a scene. Instead, Clara and I stood there together under that chandelier, two strangers bound by the same betrayal, and we smiled, not for them, but for ourselves. We talked. We laughed at things that weren't funny, just loud enough for Chloe and Julian to hear. We let them wonder. By the end of the night, Chloe was watching me with a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. And Julian's easy charm had cracked just slightly, his eyes narrowing every time Clara and I leaned toward each other and laughed. Neither of them knew it yet, but the party wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning of something neither of them would see coming. 3 days after the gala, I couldn't stand being in Atlanta anymore. Chloe had tried calling twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse she'd rehearsed. So instead, I got in my car early Tuesday morning and drove 2 hours southeast, toward Savannah, because Clara had sent me a single text the night before. "I'm packing up my studio. Could use a friend who understands. No pressure." I told myself I was just being kind, returning the favor from the gala. But if I'm honest, some part of me wanted to see her again, wanted to know more about the woman who'd stood beside me in the wreckage and refused to break. Her house sat on a quiet, oak-lined street in the historic district, ivy climbing along a wrought iron gate. It was beautiful in a way that felt lived in rather than staged, nothing like the sleek, magazine-perfect condo she shared with Julian in Atlanta, which I'd seen photos of once. This place felt like it belonged to her alone. "You actually came," she said, opening the door. She looked different than she had at the gala. Hair down, wearing a paint-stained cardigan over jeans, no makeup. Somehow, she looked more like herself. "You said you needed help packing," I said, holding up the coffee I'd brought her. "I'm good at boxes." She laughed. A real laugh, warm and a little surprised, and let me in. The house was full of her life, sheet music stacked on every surface, a wall of vinyl records, an upright piano near the bay window, sunlight pouring across its keys. We spent the morning boxing up books and framed photographs, talking about nothing important. Her childhood in Charleston, my work as an architect, the strange comfort of laughing with someone who understood exactly what you were going through, without needing it explained. Around noon, we took a break. I sat on the window seat while she made us sandwiches in the kitchen. When she came back, she paused by the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. "Do you play?" I asked. "I used to," she said. "Before. Before Julian," I assumed. She sat down slowly, like the bench itself held memories. Then, almost without meaning to, her fingers began to move. What came out of that piano stopped me cold. It wasn't a simple melody. It was layered, aching, technically stunning, the kind of composition that took years to master, not something you picked up in a hobby class. Her hands moved with a fluency that spoke of thousands of hours, a lifetime of discipline. I sat frozen on the window seat, sandwich forgotten, as the music filled the sunlit room like something alive. I recognized it halfway through. It was the bridge from Glass City Lights, Julian's breakout single. The one that had been on every radio station 2 summers ago, the one that won him his first industry award. Clara's hands stopped abruptly on the final chord. She sat very still, staring down at the keys, and when she finally looked up at me, her eyes were wet. "That's," I started. "Mine," she said quietly. It's mine. All of it. I didn't understand at first. You mean you helped him write it? She shook her head, a bitter half-smile tugging at her mouth. I wrote it. Every note, every lyric. Glass City Lights, Paper Wings, the entire Fractured Light album. 6 years of songs. I wrote all of them, alone, at this piano, in this house. The room seemed to shrink around us. Then why does his name... Because I let him take it, she said, cutting me off, her voice suddenly raw. When we got married, I was 24, unknown, terrified of rejection. Julian had connections, a label already interested in him. He told me no one signs a songwriter who won't perform. But they'd sign a singer with material this strong. He said if my name went on it too early, it would complicate the brand. He said we'd fix it later, once he was established. Once he had leverage to bring me forward as a co-writer. And later never came, I said quietly. Later never came, she echoed. Every year there was a new excuse, a new album cycle, a new reason it wasn't the right time. And I kept writing, because I loved making music more than I loved being right. I told myself the songs mattered more than the credit. Her hands curled into fists on her lap. But I watched him accept an award 2 years ago for a song I wrote about my own grandmother's funeral, and he thanked his creative instincts. Not one word about me. Not backstage, not privately, nothing. I felt something twist in my chest, not just sympathy, but real anger, sharp and immediate. Clara, that's not a favor he did you. That's theft. I know that now, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, straightening. I spent 6 years telling myself it was temporary, that I was being patient, strategic, but watching him at that gala with your wife, so comfortable, so untouchable, like nothing could ever catch up to him, something in me finally broke open. I'm done being invisible, Nathan. I'm done being patient. She looked at me with a fierce, fragile determination that reminded me exactly of the woman who'd gripped my arm under that chandelier. I want my name on my own work, she said, and I think I finally have a reason, brave enough to fight for it. I didn't know it yet, but sitting in that sunlit room, listening to the truth pour out of her, something had already shifted between us. Quiet, dangerous, and impossible to take back. I came back to Atlanta on a Sunday, 5 days after leaving Clara's studio, telling myself I needed to face my life again instead of hiding from it. The apartment felt different, colder. Chloe's things were still everywhere, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her favorite mug in the sink, but the space felt like a stranger's home now. I spent 2 days barely sleeping, replaying the gala, replaying Clara's hands on the piano, replaying 6 years of a marriage I was starting to realize I didn't fully understand. On Thursday morning, I walked to Whitfield's, the little corner cafe Chloe and I used to visit every Sunday when we first got married. Back when we still had Sunday routines, back when things felt easy. I told myself I just wanted the coffee. I told myself it had nothing to do with memory. I was wrong about being alone there. Chloe was sitting at our old table by the window, rain streaking the glass behind her, a cup of tea untouched in front of her. She looked up the moment the door chimed, like she'd been waiting there for hours hoping I'd walk in. Nathan. Her voice cracked on my name. I almost turned around and left, but something, maybe just exhaustion, maybe the part of me that still wanted answers, made me sit down across from her instead. How did you know I'd be here? I asked. I didn't. I've been coming every morning since the gala. She wrapped both hands around her cold cup. I needed somewhere that still felt like us. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I know what it looked like, she started, and I know there's no excuse that makes it okay. But please, just let me explain. Explain what, Chloe? I watched his hand on your back. I watched you laugh at him the way you used to laugh at me." Her eyes filled with tears immediately. "It wasn't about him, Nathan. It was never really about him. It was about us. We stopped talking 2 years ago. Really talking. You were buried in the Whitmore project for months. I was drowning at the gallery, dealing with investors who didn't respect me, and every night I came home to an empty apartment because you were still at the office. Julian just—" She hesitated. "He noticed me. That's all it was at first. Someone noticing me. So this is my fault," I said flatly. "No, God, no. That's not what I'm saying." She reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back before she could take it. "I'm saying I made a horrible mistake, and I'm not trying to blame you for it. I'm trying to explain how it happened, because I need you to understand that it was never real. Not the way what we had was real. It was a distraction, Nathan. A stupid, selfish distraction from a marriage that stopped feeling like a marriage." Rain tapped harder against the window. A couple at the next table glanced over, then quickly looked away. "I want to fix this," Chloe continued, voice breaking. "I ended it with Julian the morning after the gala. I told him it was over. I want to go to counseling. I want to move. I want to do whatever it takes. I love you, Nathan. I've loved you since the day we met. Please don't let one terrible mistake erase 6 years." I sat there and let her words settle over me, waiting for the old ache to rise up. The one that used to flood through me every time Chloe cried, every time she needed me, every time our marriage had wobbled and I'd instinctively moved to steady it. It didn't come. I searched for it and found nothing. Just a strange, hollow calm, like standing in a house I used to live in and realizing none of the furniture was mine anymore. "Say something," she whispered. "I believe you're sorry," I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I even believe some of what you're saying about us drifting apart. But Chloe, I watched you laugh at that party like you'd forgotten I existed. And the strange thing is, sitting here right now, listening to you beg me to stay, I don't feel what I thought I'd feel." "What do you mean?" "I mean I came here expecting to feel devastated. Instead, I keep thinking about someone else." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise her. Her face went pale. "Someone else? Nathan, who—" "Clara," I said, and saying her name out loud for the first time to Chloe felt like admitting something to myself I hadn't fully realized until that exact second. "Julian's wife. We've been talking since the gala." "You're punishing me," Chloe said, her voice sharpening. "You're doing this to hurt me the way I hurt you." "No," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not trying to hurt you at all. I'm telling you the truth, because you deserve the truth, the same way I deserved it from you 3 days ago and didn't get it." She stared at me, tears streaking silently down her face. But for the first time in that conversation, I saw something behind her grief, a flicker of realization that this wasn't a fight she could win with an apology. "I need time," I said, standing up, my untouched coffee going cold on the table. "Not to decide if I forgive you, to decide what I actually want. And right now, I don't think it's this." I left her sitting there in the rain-streaked light of our old Sunday table, and as I stepped outside into the storm, I realized I wasn't thinking about the marriage I was walking away from. I was thinking about a sunlit studio in Savannah, and a woman whose music had quietly, dangerously, become the only thing that felt real. Clara called me 5 days after the rainy cafe, her voice tight, with a nervous energy I hadn't heard from her before. "I found a lawyer," she said. "Diane Whitcomb. She specializes in music copyright and industry fraud cases. She's agreed to meet with me Thursday, in Charlotte. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'll drive up," I said, before she could even finish the question. I told myself I was just supporting a friend. But the truth was, I hadn't stopped thinking about her since that afternoon in her studio. The sound of her hands on the piano, the rawness in her voice when she'd finally said, "It's mine." Some part of me needed to see this through with her, not just for her sake, but because helping her fight for something real felt like the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. Diane Whitcomb's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower overlooking downtown Charlotte, all clean lines and quiet authority. Clara arrived wearing a sharp navy blazer, a folder of handwritten music sheets clutched to her chest like armor. Dozens of pages, dated across 6 years, time-stamped drafts of every song that had made Julian famous. "This is everything," she told Diane, sliding the folder across the desk. "Original manuscripts, voice memos with dates, even early drafts he asked me to change." Diane flipped through the pages, her expression sharpening with interest. "This is strong. Documented authorship, dated recordings. If even a fraction of this holds up, you have real grounds for a co-authorship claim, potentially damages for years of uncredited royalties." For the first time since I'd known her, I watched something like hope cross Clara's face. Then the office door opened without a knock. Julian walked in first, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by 2 lawyers in matching dark suits who looked like they billed by the minute. His easy, magnetic charm from the gala was gone, replaced by something colder. "Clara." His voice was smooth, controlled, dangerous. "You didn't think I'd find out about this little meeting? How did you—" Clara started. "I still know people," Julian said, settling into a chair without being invited, his lawyers flanking him like a wall. "Diane, always a pleasure." He nodded toward Diane, who didn't return the warmth. "Mr. Reyes, this is a private consultation," Diane said evenly. "It's about my catalog," Julian said. "I have every right to be here." His eyes slid toward me, and for the first time, real contempt flickered across his face. "And I see you brought your new boyfriend along too. Cozy." "Careful," I said quietly. Julian ignored me completely, leaning forward toward Clara instead, his voice dropping into something low and threatening. "Let's be honest with each other, Clara. You want to walk in here and claim you wrote 6 years of my catalog? Fine. Let's talk about what that actually costs you." "Julian," Diane started. "No. Let her hear this." He didn't raise his voice, which somehow made it worse. "I have a legal team that will bury you in litigation for years. We'll subpoena every session, every email, every text you ever sent me about those songs. We'll drag your name through every industry blog, every gossip column, until nobody in this business will touch you without asking, what kind of woman tries to destroy her own husband's career out of spite? You'll spend your life savings on lawyers just to prove what should have been simple, and even if you win, which you won't, it'll take 5 years, and by then, no one will remember you as anything but the bitter ex-wife who tried to steal credit." The room went silent. Clara's hands, folded tightly in her lap, had gone white at the knuckles. I watched the confidence she'd built over the past 2 weeks start to waver under the weight of his certainty. "You don't get to talk to her like that," I said, standing up. Julian finally turned to look at me fully, an ugly smile pulling at his mouth. "And who exactly are you? The architect sleeping with my wife, while his own wife was sleeping with me? That's rich. I'm the person who's not going to let you bully her into silence," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger burning through my chest. "You spent 6 years taking credit for her work. You sat in interviews and accepted awards for songs she wrote about her own family. And now, instead of facing that, you're threatening to bury her in lawsuits because you're scared of what happens when people find out the truth." "This isn't your fight," Julian snapped. "It is now," I said. "Because I've heard those songs, Julian. I sat in her studio and listened to her play the actual first drafts. The ones with lyrics you changed, the ones with her handwriting on every page. Diane has documentation you can't explain away. You can threaten all the lawsuits you want, but every day this drags out in public, more people are going to ask why a documented songwriter had to fight this hard just to get her name on her own work. Julian's jaw tightened. For the first time, his composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see the fear underneath it. "Clara," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "Think about what this actually gets you. Think about what you're risking." Clara looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, and then straightened her spine. The same fierce resolve I'd first seen under the chandelier, flooding back into her posture. "I already lost everything I was scared of losing," she said quietly. "My marriage. My name on my own songs. 6 years of silence. There's nothing left for you to threaten me with, Julian." She turned back to Diane. "Let's file." Julian stood abruptly, gathering his lawyers with a sharp gesture, his eyes cutting toward me one last time, with pure venom. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed, meeting his glare without flinching. "It's just getting started." After he stormed out, Clara sat frozen for a moment, then let out a shaky breath, tears finally spilling over, not from fear this time, but from something like relief. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not letting me do that alone." "You were never going to have to," I said, and meant every word. 4 days after the meeting in Charlotte, Clara showed up at my apartment, looking hollowed out in a way I hadn't seen before. "I can't be in the city right now," she said. Diane called this morning. Julian's team already sent a cease and desist letter, threatening to sue for defamation if I say anything publicly about the songs. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Reporters somehow already know. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "I just need to disappear for a few days before I fall apart." I didn't think twice. I know a place. My family had owned a small cabin outside Blue Ridge for years. The kind of place with no cell signal, a wood-burning fireplace, and a porch that looked out over miles of forest. We drove up that same afternoon, mostly in silence, the weight of the legal threats sitting heavy between us. By the time we arrived, dark clouds had already rolled in over the mountains. We'd barely gotten the groceries inside before the sky opened up. A real storm, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the windows in their frames. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the cabin into shadow except for the gray afternoon light bleeding through the storm outside. "Guess we're really stuck now," Clara said, trying to laugh, though it came out shaky. I got the fireplace going while she found candles in a kitchen drawer, and slowly the cabin filled with warm, flickering light. We made a simple dinner, pasta, a bottle of red wine I found in the pantry, and sat together on the worn couch facing the fire, plates balanced on our knees, rain drumming steadily against the windows. For a while, we didn't talk about Julian or Chloe at all. Clara told me about growing up in Charleston, the daughter of a church pianist who taught her to read music before she could read words. I told her about studying architecture, about the strange comfort of drafting buildings that would outlast every relationship I'd ever have. It felt easy, natural, like we'd known each other far longer than 3 weeks. Then, somewhere between the second glass of wine and the fire burning low, the conversation shifted. "Can I tell you something I haven't said out loud yet?" Clara asked, staring into the flames. "Always. I'm terrified this is just a reaction." Her voice was quiet, almost afraid of itself. "That everything I'm feeling right now, this closeness, this comfort, it's not real. That it's just two broken people clinging to each other because we're scared of being alone with what happened to us." I felt something tighten in my chest, because I'd been thinking the exact same thing for days and hadn't dared say it. "I've thought about that too," I admitted. I keep asking myself if this is just about proving something to Chloe and Julian, if I even know the difference anymore between real feelings and just needing someone to see me after feeling invisible for so long. "And what did you decide?" Clara asked, finally turning to look at me, firelight catching the uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't think it started as a reaction," I said slowly, choosing the words carefully because they mattered. "But somewhere between your studio and that lawyer's office, it stopped being about them entirely. Chloe barely crosses my mind anymore. Clara, but you," I paused. "You're the first thing I think about every morning. That's not rebound. That's something else." Her breath caught. "Nathan, I'm not asking you to say it back," I said quickly. "I just needed you to know it wasn't nothing to me." The rain kept falling outside, softer now, the fire crackling between long silences that didn't feel awkward, just full, charged with something neither of us had named yet. "I've been so afraid of wanting this," Clara admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if it's real, that means I'm not just fighting for my music anymore, I'm fighting for a whole new life, and that terrifies me more than any lawsuit Julian could ever throw at me." "Why?" "Because lawsuits I know how to survive," she said, a small, broken laugh escaping her. I have no idea how to protect myself if it goes wrong." I set my plate down on the coffee table, and without fully deciding to, I reached over and gently took her hand, the same trembling hand that had gripped my arm under the chandelier 3 weeks earlier. This time, it wasn't trembling from fear. "Then let's stop trying to protect ourselves from it," I said quietly, "and just let it happen." She looked at me for a long moment, firelight dancing across her face, rain still whispering against the windows, and then she leaned in, slowly, like she was giving both of us every chance to pull back, and kissed me. It wasn't the desperate, reactive kiss of two hurt people trying to fill an empty space. It was slow, deliberate, achingly tender, the kind of kiss that felt like the first real thing either of us had chosen in years, not out of anger or revenge, but out of something quietly, undeniably true. When we finally pulled apart, Clara rested her forehead against mine, both of us breathless, the storm outside finally beginning to soften into a steady, gentle rain. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "I don't want to pretend it isn't happening anymore." "Neither do I," I said, and for the first time since the gala, the ache in my chest had turned into something that felt almost like hope. We came back from the mountains, different people, but the world we returned to hadn't softened at all. Julian's legal team had escalated. Diane called Clara 3 days after we got back, her voice tight with frustration. "They're offering a settlement," she said, "but it's insulting. A one-time payment, a strict NDA, and you agree never to publicly claim authorship on any of the catalog. They're betting you'll take the money just to make this go away." "And if I don't take it?" Clara asked. "Then we're looking at years in court. Julian's label has resources we don't. They can outlast us financially, even if we're right." That night, sitting on my apartment floor, surrounded by legal documents, Clara set down her coffee and looked at me with a fire I hadn't seen since Charlotte. "I'm done waiting for a courtroom to give me permission to tell the truth," she said. "I want to tell people myself, directly, before Julian's team can spin it first." I thought about it for a moment, then remembered something. I know someone who might help. Marcus Webb had gone to architecture school with me before dropping out to run programming at WSAY, an independent black-owned radio station that had built a serious following across the Southeast for spotlighting artists the major labels ignored. He'd interviewed everyone from underground rappers to jazz legends nobody else would touch. More importantly, he despised exactly the kind of industry gatekeeping Julian represented. I called him the next morning, By that afternoon, we had a slot booked for a live interview. Friday, prime evening drive time, no pre-approved questions, no restrictions. "This is either the smartest thing you've ever done," Diane warned Clara when she found out, "or it's going to blow up everything we've built legally. Going public before the case is settled is a real risk." "I know," Clara said, "but if I wait for permission from a courtroom, Julian gets to control the story until then. I'd rather control it myself." The studio on Friday evening was smaller than I expected. A cramped room lined with foam soundproofing, a single upright piano pushed against the back wall, and Marcus behind a wide mixing board, headphones around his neck, watching Clara with quiet respect as she settled into the guest chair. "You ready?" he asked her 5 minutes before air. Clara's hands were trembling again, but her voice was steady. "I've been ready for 6 years." I watched from behind the glass, my heart pounding harder than I expected, as the red on-air light clicked on. "Tonight, we've got something a little different," Marcus said into the mic, his voice warm and unhurried. "Most of you know the name Julian Reyes. Fewer of you know the name Clara Reyes. Tonight, that changes." Clara told the story simply, without exaggeration, without bitterness in her voice, just quiet, devastating truth. She talked about writing at that upright piano in Savannah at 2 in the morning while Julian slept. She talked about the promise that her name would come later, and later never arriving. She talked about sitting in the audience while he accepted an award for a song about her grandmother's funeral, clapping, because that's what wives were supposed to do. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I want to play something," she said. "The real first draft, not the polished version everyone knows." She moved to the piano, and Marcus, without hesitation, opened a second mic to capture it live. What came out of her hands was different from the version I'd heard on the radio for years. Rawer, slower, aching with a vulnerability the produced track had smoothed away entirely. When she sang the opening lines, her voice untrained but honest, cracking slightly on the high notes, the studio went completely silent, except for the music. It was Glass City Lights, but it sounded like something entirely new, something true. When she finished, she looked directly into the microphone. "That's how it sounded the night I wrote it," she said quietly, "before it became someone else's song." The phone lines lit up almost instantly. Marcus fielded calls for the next 20 minutes. Listeners stunned, moved, furious on Clara's behalf. By the time the segment ended, Marcus's producer had already told him the clip was spreading online, clipped and shared across every platform, the raw piano version racking up views faster than anything the station had ever posted. By Saturday morning, it was everywhere. Music blogs picked it up, then entertainment news sites. A prominent culture journalist wrote a piece titled "The Woman Behind the Songs," breaking down years of interviews where Julian had described his creative process in ways that now sounded, in hindsight, deeply hollow. Julian's label went into full damage control. Their planned single release got quietly postponed. 2 brand partnerships he'd had lined up issued cautious statements about reviewing the situation. A tour announcement scheduled for the following week never came. Clara sat in my apartment that Sunday, scrolling through the flood of messages on her phone, some cruel, most overwhelmingly supportive, and looked up at me with an expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. "I don't think I fully understood what I was about to do," she admitted. "I just knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." "You didn't just tell your story," I said, sitting beside her. "You took it back." She leaned into me, exhausted but lighter than I'd seen her in weeks. The storm she'd unleashed finally out of her hands and into the world where it belonged. Neither of us knew yet just how quickly that storm would come crashing back to our door. 5 days after the radio interview went viral, Chloe called me 11 times in a row. I'd been ignoring her for weeks, letting the silence say what I hadn't found the words for yet. But that Wednesday evening, standing in my kitchen making dinner for Clara and me, my phone buzzed one more time. A text this time. "I need to see you tonight. Please, it's important." I almost ignored it too. Then a second text came through. "Julian's with me. We're coming to your place, whether you answer or not." I looked up at Clara, who'd read the messages over my shoulder, her face going pale. "They're coming here?" "Apparently. Do you want me to leave?" she asked, already reaching for her jacket. I caught her hand. "No, stay. Whatever this is, I want you standing right here for it." They arrived 20 minutes later. I opened the door to find Chloe first, mascara smudged like she'd been crying in the car, and Julian just behind her, jaw tight, none of his usual polish intact. Whatever alliance existed between them now was clearly born from desperation, not affection. "Can we come in?" Chloe asked quietly. I stepped aside. They walked into my loft, and I watched both of their gazes land on Clara, standing near the kitchen island, calm and unflinching, in a way that seemed to unsettle them both. "This is cozy," Julian said, an attempt at his old sneer that came out hollow instead. "Say what you came to say," I said, closing the door behind them. Chloe spoke first, her voice trembling. "Nathan, my gallery dropped me this morning. 3 of my biggest clients pulled their pieces after some blog connected me to Julian's scandal, said I was entangled in industry controversy. I lost everything I built over the past 5 years in one phone call." Tears spilled down her face. "I know I don't deserve your sympathy, but I'm asking anyway. Please, can we talk about fixing this? Just us? I'll do anything." I felt the old instinct rise in me, the reflex of 6 years spent smoothing over her every crisis. But this time, it passed through me like a current, with nothing to hold on to. "Chloe," I said gently, "I'm sorry your gallery dropped you. I mean that. But there's no version of tonight that ends with us fixing anything, because there's nothing left between us to fix." "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I do," I said. "I've meant it since that morning at the cafe, if I'm honest. I just wasn't ready to say it yet." Julian, meanwhile, had turned his attention entirely to Clara, stepping forward with the same cold authority he'd used in Charlotte, though it cracked slightly at the edges now. "You need to understand what you've done," he said. "My label dropped my option for a second album this morning. 2 brand deals are gone. I'm being called a fraud on national entertainment blogs. You've destroyed 6 years of work over a settlement you could have just accepted." "It was never my work to accept a settlement on," Clara said quietly. "It was mine to reclaim." "I have a proposal," Julian continued, pulling a folder from his jacket, his hand slightly unsteady. "A revised agreement. Full co-writing credit going forward. A percentage of future royalties. A public joint statement calling this a creative partnership misunderstanding. But you sign a strict NDA. No more interviews. No more piano performances on the radio. This ends tonight, quietly, and we both walk away with something." Clara looked at the folder like it was something dead. "You're not offering me justice, Julian. You're offering me a smaller cage with better furniture. It's the only offer you're going to get," he snapped, some of his old menace returning. "No," I said, stepping forward. "It's not." Both of them turned to look at me. "Clara doesn't need your permission to tell the truth anymore," I said. "The world already knows it. You didn't come here to negotiate, Julian. You came here because you're scared, and you're trying to control the one thing you still think you can." Her silence. "That's over." Julian's jaw clenched, but for the first time, he had nothing to say back. I turned to Chloe, who was watching all of this with quiet devastation, and reached into the drawer of the side table where I'd left a manila envelope 3 days earlier, signed Notarized. Ready. I had my lawyer draw these up last week, I said, holding it out to her. Divorce papers, already signed on my end. I was going to mail them, but since you're here, Chloe stared at the envelope like it might burn her. Nathan, please, don't do this in front of them. I'm not doing this because of them, I said. I'm doing it because it's the truth, and I'm done being afraid of saying things out loud in front of an audience. You taught me that lesson at the gala, whether you meant to or not. She took the envelope with shaking hands, tears streaming freely now, but she didn't argue further. Something in her posture told me she already knew this moment had been coming since that night under the chandelier. I turned to Julian. And you can leave that folder on the table on your way out. Clara doesn't need it. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Julian, defeated in a way I don't think he'd ever experienced before, dropped the folder on the counter and walked toward the door without another word. Chloe lingered a second longer, looking at me one final time, not with anger, but with something like grief for the life we'd never get back, before following him out. The door closed. The loft went quiet. Clara let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for the entire conversation, then looked at me, eyes wide with something between disbelief and relief. You just ended your marriage in your kitchen, she said softly. I ended it the night I watched him put his hand on her back, I said, pulling her close. Tonight, I just made it official. For the first time since the gala, standing in the wreckage of 2 broken marriages, it finally felt like we were building something instead of just surviving something. A week after the confrontation in my loft, an email landed in Clara's inbox that neither of us saw coming. The Larkspur Independent Music Showcase, one of the most respected platforms in the country for artists working outside major label systems, invited her to headline their upcoming evening at the Hendrix Symphony Hall in Washington, D.C. The email cited her raw, unfiltered radio performance and called her one of the most compelling new voices in American songwriting. New voice, like she hadn't been writing brilliant music in the shadows for 6 years. I don't know if I'm ready for something this big, Clara admitted the night the email arrived, pacing my kitchen with her phone still clutched in her hand. A radio interview is one thing. A live solo performance at a 900-seat concert hall is completely different. You've been performing your whole life, I reminded her, just never under your own name. She stopped pacing and looked at me for a long moment. That's exactly what terrifies me. We drove up to D.C. together 5 days later. Julian's career, meanwhile, had continued its public collapse. His label quietly shelved his second album entirely. 2 more brand partnerships dissolved, and industry blogs had started running retrospective pieces re-examining his entire catalog with a far more skeptical eye. He'd gone silent on social media completely. Chloe, for her part, had moved out of state to stay with her sister, the divorce proceeding without complication, without contact, without the drama I'd half expected. The night of the showcase, I sat in the front row of Hendrix Symphony Hall, dressed in the same tuxedo I'd worn to the museum gala 5 weeks earlier, a detail Clara had pointed out with a small, nervous laugh backstage, like the universe was giving us a chance to rewrite that night properly. The hall was packed. Word had spread fast in independent music circles, amplified by the viral radio clip, by the growing wave of press coverage, by simple curiosity about the woman whose voice had been hidden behind someone else's name for 6 years. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. And then Clara walked onto the stage. She wore a deep burgundy gown, simple and elegant, nothing like the borrowed spotlight she used to stand in beside Julian. Her hair was down, her expression calm, in a way that still managed to carry the weight of everything she'd survived to get here. The stage lights caught her face as she settled at the piano, a real grand piano this time, not an upright crammed into a radio studio, and the audience erupted into applause before she'd even played a single note. She let it settle, then leaned toward the microphone. 6 years ago, I wrote a song about my grandmother, she said, her voice steady despite the size of the room. It became famous under someone else's name. Tonight, for the first time, I get to play it as myself. She played Glass City Lights, the true, unpolished version, the one she'd first performed on the radio, and the hall fell into a silence so complete you could hear the strings ring in the space between notes. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, sustained, the kind of ovation that spoke of something larger than admiration. It felt like vindication. She played 3 more songs after that, each one a piece of her catalog reclaimed piece by piece. Each one met with the same overwhelming response. I sat in that front row, chest tight with pride, watching the woman I'd first met, trembling beside me under a chandelier, now command an entire concert hall with nothing but her hands and her voice. Then, near the end of the set, she paused, resting her hands lightly on the keys, and looked out into the audience, directly at me. "This last piece is new," she said. "I finished writing it 2 weeks ago, at a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, during a storm that knocked out the power for 2 days." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It's about learning that the scariest thing isn't losing everything you built your life around. It's realizing you have to lose it before you can find out who you actually are underneath it. She glanced down at the keys, then back up, and her voice softened. "This is for the man who sat beside me while I rebuilt myself, note by note, and never once asked me to be smaller for his comfort. Nathan, this one's for you." I don't fully remember the details of what she played next, only the way the melody moved, slow and aching at first, then building into something warm and triumphant, unlike anything else in her catalog. It wasn't about betrayal or reclaiming stolen credit. It was tender, in a way none of her earlier songs had been allowed to be, because for 6 years, tenderness had never been safe to write. When the final note faded, the hall rose to its feet as one, the applause rolling over her in waves. Clara sat at the piano for a moment, overwhelmed, tears slipping freely down her face, before standing to take her bow, not Julian's wife, not the woman behind someone else's fame, but simply Clara Whitfield, songwriter, in her own name, on her own stage. Afterward, backstage, surrounded by the quiet chaos of stagehands and well-wishers, she found me waiting near the wings and walked straight into my arms without a word. "I finally understand what you meant that night in the cabin," she whispered against my shoulder, "about choosing something instead of just surviving it." "You didn't just choose it," I said, holding her tightly. "You just proved it, in front of 900 people." She pulled back to look at me, eyes still bright with tears, but for the first time since I'd met her, completely, fearlessly happy. "1 more month," she said softly. "Then this is officially the rest of our lives." I kissed her there, in the wings of that stage, surrounded by the fading applause of a room that had just witnessed her reclaim everything she'd been told to give away. And for the first time, the future felt less like something uncertain and more like something we were finally writing together. 45 days after I stood frozen under a museum chandelier watching my marriage fall apart in public, I sat in a sun-drenched garden behind a historic jazz club in Greenwich Village, watching Clara laugh with a sound engineer about microphone placement, and I finally understood what it meant to feel completely at peace. The Bramwell Room had been operating since 1947, a legendary jazz club tucked below street level, with a small hidden courtyard garden out back, where musicians had been known to work out arrangements for decades before their names ever mattered. It felt fitting that Clara had chosen this place to record her first solo album. Not a polished corporate studio, but somewhere with history, somewhere that understood what it meant for an artist to finally arrive fully as herself. "They want to call it Glass City Lights," Clara said, sitting down across from me at the small wrought iron table, sunlight scattering through the leaves above us. "The album. Same title as the song." I told the producer it felt right, taking back the title along with everything else. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. A lot had happened in the 2 weeks since DC Diane had called, with news that Julian's legal team, facing overwhelming public pressure and a mounting pile of evidence, had finally agreed to settle. Full co-writing credit, retroactively applied across the entire catalog, substantial back royalties, and no NDA. Clara's name now appeared, officially and permanently, on 6 years of music the world had believed belonged to someone else. Julian's career, meanwhile, hadn't recovered. His label quietly dropped him entirely a week after the settlement was finalized. The last I'd heard, he'd moved to Nashville to try rebuilding from scratch, largely unrecognized, mostly ignored by an industry that had moved on without him. Chloe, for her part, had finally started to find her footing again. She'd taken a curator position at a small gallery in Charlotte, closer to her sister, far from the wreckage of Atlanta. Our divorce had finalized 8 days earlier, a quiet, unremarkable legal formality that closed out 6 years of marriage with far less drama than the affair that ended it. She'd sent me one last text after the papers were filed. "I hope you're happy, Nathan. I mean that." I believed her. "You're quiet," Clara said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Just thinking about how strange it is," I said. 45 days ago, I thought my life was ending. Now I'm sitting in a garden in New York, watching you record your first album under your own name, and I've never felt more certain about anything." She smiled, lacing her fingers through mine. "I keep thinking about that night at the gala. How awful it felt standing there, watching everything I thought I understood about my life fall apart in front of a room full of strangers." "I remember," I said quietly. "But if you think about it," she continued, "that was the only way either of us would have ever found the courage to leave. Julian would have kept me quiet for another 6 years if it hadn't happened in public like that. Some part of me needed the humiliation to become fuel instead of shame. And I never would have found you," I added. "Not really. Not the way I know you now." She looked out at the garden, at the ivy climbing the brick walls, at musicians beginning to gather near the club's back entrance for the evening's rehearsal, and let out a soft, contented breath. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never ended up standing next to each other that night? If some usher had just seated us on opposite sides of the room?" "I try not to think about it," I admitted. "Feels too much like tempting fate." She laughed, and the sound settled something deep in my chest, the same way it had the first time I'd heard it under that chandelier weeks ago. "I used to think the worst night of my life happened at that gala," she said, turning back to me, her eyes soft in the afternoon light. "Now I think it might have been the best one, just wearing a disguise." I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the same gesture I'd made a dozen times since Blue Ridge, each time feeling less like something new and more like something I'd always been meant to do. "For what it's worth," I said, "I think we composed something neither of us saw coming that night. Not just the music. Us. A masterpiece built out of wreckage," she said, with a small, knowing smile. "Something like that." Inside the club, the sound engineer called her name, letting her know they were ready to start the first take. She stood, straightening her dress, then paused and leaned down to kiss me softly before heading toward the entrance. "Come watch?" she asked, holding out her hand. I took it without hesitation, the same way I had the very first night, standing beside her under that chandelier, refusing to let the people who'd betrayed us see either one of us break. We walked into the dim, warm interior of the club together, past walls lined with black and white photographs of jazz legends who'd once stood in that same room and turned their own heartbreak into something the world couldn't ignore. Clara settled behind the piano, the recording light blinking on, and looked back at me one final time before she began to play. Whatever storm had brought us together, whatever wreckage we'd both had to walk through to find each other, none of it mattered anymore. In that quiet, golden moment, out of a party neither of us wanted to attend, out of a betrayal neither of us saw coming, we had built something entirely our own, unexpected, unbelievable, and undeniably ours. And as her fingers touched the keys, filling the room with the opening notes of a song only she could have written, I finally understood that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the exact moment everything else falls apart.